Hey, well, welcome everybody. I went ahead and started the recording. Yes, thank you. I see some people sending me Reiki. I was saying before it started the recording that I'm actually a little sick today. My family's been kind of fighting stuff off, as you all well know. Back to school is definitely a rampant time for that. And even though I have all of my immunity support and things like that, sometimes it does tend to get you. But that's okay. It is what it is. I'm glad that I'm able to be here today. I feel well enough for that. So just a few announcements because we have some stuff coming up. At On November 20th, we will be having, I'm just making sure that I've got those dates right. On November 20th, we will be having our free webinar. It is Reiki for past life healing. So all about that. We do a guided journey, things like that. We will be opening that up to register for that soon. I'm working on the back end with everything, and it's almost completed. So we, of course, will announce that once that's open. We'll put it in the description of all of our things, the podcast, YouTube, things like that. And so be on the lookout for that. But in the meantime, you can save the date. It will be on November 20th, which is a Wednesday at 10 a.m. And we'll learn all about past lives and past life healing and then do some of that work that day. If you can't make it live, that's okay. You can still register for it and you will receive the replay. And then the other thing is that we have a Reiki 1 and 2 class coming up in December and an Animal Reiki 1 and 2 class coming up in December as well. So those are the few announcements. You can go to reikilifestyle.com and take a look at our classes, take a look at our calendar, and that'll have more information about all of that as well, especially all of our classes. Okay, so what we are talking about today is a very common subject and a very common question that we get when we are talking about Reiki journey techniques, when we're talking about psychic impressions or psychic downloads, when we are in that journey space, or let's say you're in an experience or an attunement, and you get these really big visions or impressions. And that question is, am I making it up? And the answer is no. So that's the talk. We're good. Don't need to go further. No, just kidding. But that is the short answer is no. And I'll talk a little bit about the discernment piece with that, because also there's some nuances to that answer of no. But really, when it comes down to it, that is the short answer. The slightly longer, but still short answer of that is, if you were able to make it up, you would be a novelist. If you were able to make it up, you would probably have, with the fantastical things that come through. I know for me, the fantastical things that come through, I could never make it up, especially if I'm journeying for other people, because it's so outside of my own context, of my own framework, of my own sense of knowledge and wisdom, that there is no way that I would be able to make it up, because to me, it's like I would not even ever string those words together or string those ideas together or receive those impressions. And so those are some of the ways that you can tell that you are not making it up. So those are kind of the short answers to it. A little bit more in the longer form answers is the reasons that we have those thoughts of, am I making it up? When it comes to that question, I will say, in this caveat I was saying earlier about the nuances to that question and the discernment to that question, it is good to have discernment around it, right? Because when we're in these states, we do want to be in this place, especially if we are journeying for other people. We do want to be in that place of discernment, because there are, of course, when we are doing this work, we want to make sure that we are within ethical boundaries, right? We want to make sure that we are staying within the scope of our practice. And we've had some podcasts around this. We had the ethical psychic on. She has a book. I forget the name off the top of my head. Sorry, should have had that in some notes somewhere. We also had a conversation with this recently with Lisa Campion, who we had on the podcast as a guest as well, shamanic practitioner, shamanic Reiki practitioner. And so, yes, of course, we have those ethical considerations. We have the scope of practice considerations, like, of course, never diagnosing people or changing medications or, things like that, that we want to be within our discernment around. And it's funny enough, I'm just making this connection in this moment. I was walking with a friend this morning, and she had asked me about something that was going on with her dog. And I said, and she knows this about me. She does energy work as well. She's like, I know you're not a medical intuitive. Can you pick up on anything with, what's going on with my dog? And so, there are those aspects that, of course, when, I can check into it and see if I receive information, but it's not within my scope of practice to be a medical intuitive. It's not within my scope of practice. I'm not trained in any sort of veterinary medicine or vet tech or anything like that. And so in those cases, even though it's a friend and I feel very comfortable with her and we've done a lot of work together at the same time, I am still going to be very discerning about anything that I might pick up on or share around that. And of course, my first line of saying anything about that, it's like, well, when can you get into the vet? Because if there's this change in behavior, that's going to be what you're going to check out first, things like that. And so even though I might have received impressions, of course, that is going to be where I'm going to go to first. And that is true when we're talking about journeying for others, when we're talking about this idea of maybe some impressions that we have received for people, is that we have that scope of practice and that discernment aspect of it. And even experienced people are still going to be in that process of discernment. And so that's what I meant with, or that's what I mean when there are some nuances to this. So I just want to have that out of the way. Also, having said that, when it comes to that question, there are so many reasons why we might have this kind of culturally created aspect of ourselves. I would say, especially if we might be in academia, or maybe we have a lot of, um, time in academia. Maybe we are more of a linear thinker, or maybe we are have a background, let's say, in accounting, for example, where we have that more left brain version of ourselves, I would say, because I would say in that category, that we might even be in more of that, well, this is just not logical that I would receive this information, that I would experience this in the journey. How could this be real? How could I not be making this up? Because it's just can be so fantastical, some of the reason or some of the things that we might receive in our journey work. And then also on a part of that with it is that sometimes the things that come through are so loving to ourselves, that you have these gifts and talents, that you are a beautiful person, that you are going into this healing and this revealing work and this empowerment work, that sometimes that we have a hard time believing it for those reasons as well. And so this brings us into this aspect of this difficulty in trusting our intuition with it. Also, that we have become so disconnected from our imagination, that can be a part of it, because maybe as children, we were told, oh, that's just your imagination. And so anything that's outside of this certain societal box that we might have, like whether it's linear or whether it's not, whether it is like we can't be self empowered, although that's changing, but that we can't be self empowered with it. Um, that is our imagination, and therefore imagination can be bad, right? As we become older children, for example, it can be that, oh, that's just your imagination. And so anything outside of just what it should be, and say that in quotation marks, is imagination and therefore invalid. And in fact, that's happening with my daughter right now. She's 8 and or just about to turn 8, and she is, um, having some fear at night and, maybe hearing things or seeing things. And so there is this kind of delicate balance, right, of helping her through that. And maybe she is experiencing that. I'm not saying that she's not, but helping her through that and not just saying, oh, that's just your imagination. That's wrong to feel that way. It's wrong to, you're not seeing those things, things like that. And that's just changing in this generation. Right? Like, that is this awareness of these kids now, and, a little bit older than her as well. But even in my generation, that was just our imagination when those things have happened. So anything that is outside of these societal expectations of what should and shouldn't be is just our imagination. And so when that comes to journey work, that contributes to that, right? That we're like, oh, this is outside of any sort of logical thought. This is outside of any sort of something that I may think or know about myself or about others or about the way this all works, anyways. So, therefore, that's just my imagination. I must be making that up. So these are all different reasons why we might have a hard time believing ourselves, trusting ourselves, that maybe we have been disconnected from our spiritual guidance or insights that we might have. Also, that sometimes we hear about these profound experiences that people have, and that can, if we don't have that exact experience, maybe we just had a word show up, or maybe we just had a relaxed feeling in our body, or, that usually is a little easier to believe. But maybe if it's not a profound experience, that it is, it might also be another experience that we are making up. And that some of us have, those are profound experiences. I know, there might be also, we hear so much now about, with plant medicine, those profound experiences. And a lot of times we might have an easier time believing that because it's like this external thing that is creating those experiences, right? And so if it's I put that in quotations again for those of you that are listening, if it's just a journey, that how could we have a profound experience, or even maybe less than those pinnacle experiences, maybe slightly just just an experience, oh, that it can't be real. So there's those kinds of things that can create us to think, am I making this up? If you're like me, I have a very overthinking mind with it. And so that rationale can override any intuitive experiences, can be another thing. Also, what if I'm making a mistake, right? What if I'm getting it wrong? What if any sort of thing that maybe comes through in a journey for myself is wrong, especially if I've said it out loud, you know, God forbid if we get it wrong and those kinds of things. But then if we add that to journeying for somebody else, that adds that pressure to an even greater degree. So there's all of these things that can create this question of, am I making it up? And not believing ourselves and not even maybe believing the messages that come through. Maybe if you have a spirit guide, it's like, can I trust that information that's coming through to you? And I would say that over time, and this is going to be a part of this next part of the talk. I would say over time that you do release that and go into this really deep sense of trust. However, there are still times where you do still question it of like, is that real? Am I making that up? Especially in your waking life, if you have intuitive impressions coming through of am I making this up? In a journey, for example, I might be able to fully trust it, but in my waking life, maybe I'm not able to fully trust my intuition or different impressions or downloads that I might have come through. So might be a little less trust within that. So there's those times too. And, I've heard Colleen say the same things, and she's been doing this for a really long time. Am I, that's still that process of like, am I making this up? So it's also very normal. And that's the other thing of, you know, there's something to knowing that it's normal that helps you feel more confident in it. There's something to that normalization that kind of relaxes you into it of like, okay, it's not just me that is asking these questions. Also, again, that discernment process that we each have is also not necessarily a bad thing, right? But somewhere along the line, it's about releasing all of these things from this cultural conditioning that we have in order to go into that self trust, in order to go into the trust of Reiki or the trust of spirit, of your spirit guides, maybe of them bringing us this information or us receiving this information that that helps us to be in that very settled and grounded and rooted space of this information that comes through for us. Because really, when it comes down to it, however we want to think about it, we're accessing a part of our subconscious, a part of our higher self, a part of the non-physical spiritual world. There's going to be so many different perceptions about how this all works anyway, that it is that there are ways to access that, with just on our own or through the frequency of music that can help us get there, through the frequencies of Reiki energies that can help us get there. There's so many different ways that we, do journey techniques or access that kind of non physical aspect of our ordinary waking life. So there's a lot of things that we can do to help us to overcome that. First of all, one of the biggest ones is time and experience and practice. So there is that aspect of it, right? Over time, you have enough validation. I'm going to talk about that in a second. You have enough validation to know, like, oh, I'm not making this up. You have enough experiences to know. You have enough, maybe, especially if you start journeying for other people, there's things that you would not like, why would that come through? And then the person is like, no, that's exactly right. And you have that validation again with it. So with Reiki energy or anytime you're doing journey techniques, you have healing that comes through. So you have that again, when we're talking about that imagination piece, maybe there's things from your childhood that need to be released in order for that authentic imagination or that authentic part of yourself, or just even that remembering that you have the ability to access these things. And cultures across the world for millennia have been doing this as well. So, in many indigenous cultures, they haven't lost these practices. They've been doing them all along, right? They haven't lost these ways. And so there's an inherent trust with that as well. So, when it comes to validation, I want to talk about that just a little bit because there is this perception that it's wrong to want the validation, right? And there is a delicate balance with it because it's not about doing all of this work so that you can have validation in yourself, validation and, oh, I got it right, things like that. But there is this process in the beginning of when we are doing these practices, when we are learning these techniques, that validation is actually really helpful because what it does is help you to build your confidence. And not everybody needs that, but a lot of us do. So if we are working with just ourselves, we might have an impression that comes through in a journey and that later well, maybe in the moment it makes a lot of sense, maybe it doesn't, but later it comes through that it's like, oh, okay, that experience was validated because of A, B, and C. If you're journeying for another person, the validation can be really helpful because you're questioning it, right? Am I making this up? And when you have that validation happen, um, it can be so helpful because you're like, "Oh, I wasn't making this up. I can trust myself." And over time, the not need for validation, that's kind of the wrong word, but that aspect of validation goes away. You don't need that quite as much to build that confidence. And so to me, there is this aspect in the spiritual world, and I understand why the validation, it's not about ego. We're still within that humility aspect. It's not about building ourselves up with that validation. It's about being able to go into that deeper level of trust of the information that's coming through. And when we have an experience that's like, yep, that's right on, that helps us in that trust. So there's that part as well. And if you go into an experience and you're like, okay, that was validated, there is a little bit of healing around that sometimes. Like, okay, I need to not feel bad that felt good that I was validated in that experience. And I'll tell you what, building your intuition in waking life, a lot of times the validation can really help. Also, the times when you didn't follow the intuition and then it was correct at the time. It's like, those times when you have that intuitive impression and you're like, "Oh," and you didn't follow it, right? And then something happens and you're like, I knew it. I knew it. And even though you didn't follow it in the time, even that experience can help you to maybe next time you're going to follow it when you have that same feeling in your body or you have that same experience come through in your mind or your knowing, however your intuitive senses work for you. So it's a little bit of one of those things that's not always talked about with that validation piece of it, because I do also agree that, we need to have that balance of like, it's not about the ego, but it is about creating that self trust within ourselves. Also, when we are in this journey experience, having a safe space to practice can be really helpful because sometimes it feels like a lot putting ourselves out there. If you can practice with a group of people, if you can be in a safe space around it, that safe container that can be really helpful because it is a little bit intimidating to when you're first learning how to do this. It is a little bit intimidating, especially if other people, grasp it really quickly and you think, oh, everybody else is having that experience, but I'm not having an experience. Especially if there's those really big, profound ones that are happening for people. And so being in a space where you can share or explore without fear of mistakes or judgment is hugely helpful, because it allows you to go further into that trust with yourself and with the different information that comes through. I also have a inherent trust in the Reiki energy. And that to me is one of the things, and people are going to have an inherent trust maybe in their spirit guides, or it's going to be different depending on how you do this work and how you do, develop your intuition, how you might do journey work, things like that. Um, and so that's another piece of it for me. That is the Reiki energy. I just have such a deep level of trust in the Reiki energy that I feel like I can allow myself to go as far as I need or want to in order um, to go into that exploration. And when you have that deep level of trust, that does again allow you to go as far as you need or want to. Now, that can take time and practice and building of that trust with it. But because Reiki specifically is an enlightened energy and comes from the highest sources of consciousness and is unconditional love or pure love, or, however you might perceive what Reiki energy is, to me, source consciousness, there's no duality, it's only enlightened, that I have such a deep level of trust that I can allow any experience that comes through. But that wasn't always the case. That took time, that took experience, that took um, those experiences of, am I making this up? And realizing somewhere along the line that I am not making this up, but also at the same time, still being in that discernment process with it. So that is the other part of it. Also, going into that place of how it feels in your body. And this is another piece of that. If you are an overthinker, even if you're not, I think everybody experiences this. If you have anxiety, you're prone to anxiety. What is fear? What is worry? What is intuition? And the differences in that. And I would say that that is another piece of like discernment for ourselves. Am I making this up? And I will say that I think that that is, some people have it down, right? I know for me, it's a continual practice of learning about that. I'm an overthinker. My anxiety is pretty manageable now, but in the past, I've had really bad anxiety. And so there is that of like, how do I trust what's just overthinking, worrying, um, anxiety, things like that, and what is intuition and what I am, and I don't actually hear stuff, but what I'm hearing within my intuitive senses. And so that discernment process as well is another place that I also have to ask myself, okay, what am I making up here and what is intuition? And I know that just from that experience and also hearing so many other people share about this, it really is about that discernment of how I'm feeling in the body when I'm in a state of fear or overthinking or worry versus how I feel in the body when something is actually in my intuition. Like this is my intuition speaking around this. So there is that aspect as well. And to me, again, that's another thing that just is, I will say too, that is a really big place of, I was going to say time and experience. But that is another really big place of that. Did I follow my intuition? And like, shoot, I didn't back then. And I wish I would have. Like those experiences and paying attention to those is another really been another really big practice for me. But that's going to be different for every single person because not everybody has that. I think we all have it to a degree, of course, but not everybody has that aspect. And so that part of it is we're all going to have those different things in our life, right? Where maybe mine is that overthinking aspect and other people aren't going to have that. Sometimes, I have these conversations with my husband about my overthinking and the things that I worry about, and especially after like a social engagement, and the overthinking that can come from that. And he's like, "What?" Like he just doesn't even get it that I would have that aspect. But then like neurodivergent, and he's got ADHD, and clinically diagnosed with it, and so then too the things that like he can go into, and I just think, what? And it's just really interesting to see how our minds work with that, and the differences and how our minds work with that. But when it comes down to it, like for me with that overthinking, it is so much of like I really know that I'm in my overthinking when my body is just like and when I'm in my intuition around it, my body is a lot more grounded. It's a lot more calm. And so that is a really big place that I can feel the difference for. And I'm not a clairsentient, where I feel things physically. So that's actually not really one of my clairsenses, in the way that it is for some people where they feel everything in their body, or clair empathic. I'm empathic to a degree, but I'm not like, that's not my main clair sense. My main clair sense is claircognizance and clair intellect. And so, but I still feel that difference in my body with that. And so there's like just like that learning process of the things that I'm actually making up, because I do that too, I'm making up things in my head, and the things that are actually my intuition and how that feels so differently with that. So it's a process, it's a practice, it's an exploration. It's a healing of those experiences that we've had with our imagination, that we've had from our life around those kinds of topics. And also, it's the long term, like, oh, I'm not making that up because A, I couldn't, and B, because I know in hindsight that I wasn't making that up. So the journey today, we're going to be going into that healing of imagination around it, because that can be super helpful. And Reiki can really help us in that exploration with it all. And again, short answer, no, you're not making it up. So the amount of times that Colleen and I have said that, even to ourselves as well. But then of course, when we're, in our teaching mode too, it's like, no, that's pretty incredible and profound information that is coming through for you. So also, I wanna say thank you for the Reiki, because I am feeling a little bit better. I can feel it. So for those of you that put it into the chat, I appreciate it, or didn't and are sending anyway. So thanks.